Good morning. This is Susan Poss. I'm a math instructor at Spartanburg Community College, and we're continuing on looking at addition and subtracting of fractional or rational expressions. I have only two examples on here. One is addition and the other is subtraction, but I wanted to walk you through the steps that I have in my mind as I work with addition of fractions that you can see these denominators don't match. So we've got to get a lowest common denominator. So here's how I treat the process when I'm working with this. I factor the denominators. All right, I need two numbers that multiply to give me negative 28 and add to give me a positive 3. Now let me take a minute and look at that. I think I'm going to extend this line while I'm talking. I think that looks pretty good. And I'm going over to the second one, and I'm going to factor that denominator as well. And that's going to go 7 and 1 plus and minus. So I've factored my denominators, so check off that first step. Now I'm going to determine the LCD. So I'm seeing 1x plus 7 here and 1x plus 7 there. So in the LCD, I'm going to list one of those x plus 7s. I also need an x minus 4. Remember, we form a product here, so we're multiplying these things together. I also need an x minus 1. All right, so I've got my denominators factored. I have determined what needs to go in the LCD. Third step I do is my comparison step. So I compare the existing denominators to the LCD, and I fill in the missing factors. So let me change the color here. First denominator contains the x plus 7 and the x minus 4. As I compare over here to the LCD, I can see that it's missing the x minus 1, and of course we fill that in the top and the bottom. Second comparison, I see the x plus 7 and I see the x minus 1, but it looks like I'm missing the x minus 4, and again we fill that in on the top and the bottom of that fraction. Again, so you can see I'm multiplying by 1 on the first fraction and multiplying by 1 on the second fraction, not changing the value, just changing the form. All right, so now step 4, we're ready for one long fraction bar. And the reason we're ready for that is because now the denominators match. So I can just write that denominator down once. It is now the common denominator. And I'm going to go ahead and distribute this as I work. So that's going to be 4x squared. This is going to be minus 4x. Notice this is addition, so it's a positive 3 times x. We don't have to worry about sign changes in here. And then this positive 3 times that negative 4 brings me to a negative 12. So I've got everything over one fraction bar, and I'm kind of working on the numerator. I've got a little bit more to do on this numerator. So I've got a second degree term. These two first degree terms are going to add up to negative 1x, and then here's the minus 12 on the end. I tested this one out earlier. I would now need to see if I can reduce, but when I tried to factor this numerator, I could not get it to factor, so I think we're finished with this one. Let's go back quickly and talk about restrictions, because we talked about those earlier. On the variable, so this one has 3 restrictions as I'm looking down here in this denominator. X cannot be negative 7, it cannot be positive 4, and it cannot be positive 1. So if you're working with questions about domain, you're going to look down there in that denominator and figure out any value for x that would cause this denominator to go to 0, because again, division by 0 is undefined. All right, so that's our addition problem. With our steps, I've got one more problem here. which is a subtraction problem, and I wrote down the same 5 steps again so we could work through those together. So the first step is to factor each denominator. And since this first one has an x minus y quantity squared, you can write it down, x minus y quantity squared, or you can go ahead and expand it and write it down twice if you want to. Minus, and I'm going to factor this one. I see a common 2. And then here's the x up here. Looks like I'm not quite finished factoring yet. So let me go one more round here. These are the kind of problems that are so long and complicated. They're fun to work out and put up on the refrigerator at home, and everybody thinks you're a genius because you've worked this great big long problem. It takes a whole page. All right, so what am I doing here? I'm taking this x squared minus y squared, that's the difference of 2 squares, and I'm factoring that. So now I have all of my denominators factored, so I can check off my first step. That's done. Now let's determine the LCD. And in determining the LCD, it looks like I've already written it in here, you need to account for each one of these unique factors. So the 2 is unique. I put him in there. I see an x plus y. I don't see another one of those, so I put an x plus y in there one time. And then when you have duplicates like this, you go for the greatest number of times the factor occurs in any one denominator. So in this one denominator, this factor occurs twice. So you see me listing it twice. That's a greater number of times than once here. So again, the greater number of times is the number of times you list. So we've got our LCD determined over here. And now we're ready for the comparisons step and the filling in step. I hope I've left myself enough room, but I'm going to try. I guess I'll just go one more time here. All right, so now I'm doing the comparison step. And I'm looking at this denominator. I'm comparing it over here with the LCD. And it looks like I'm missing the 2 and the x plus y. So I'm going to fill both of those in. Notice I put parentheses around that first numerator. So there I filled in all the things that were missing as I compared to that LCD. All right, so I'm doing a comparison here. I've got the 2. I've got the x plus y, I've got one of the x minus y's. Looks like I'm missing an x minus y. Let me get this one copied down, and then I'll fill in what's missing. So I'm missing another x minus y. Okay, so now I've got this situated the way I wanted it. I've got one denominator here that matches that same denominator over there. So I've got my 2 denominators alike. And let me put a little red star in here because I want you to pay attention when I do this in just a minute. I want to be sure that I note that the subtraction is going to require some sign changes as I work. So just be especially alert when you're subtracting. All right, so I'm ready for 1 fraction bar over the LCD. So here comes my 1 fraction bar. And I'm going to go ahead and start writing this in a little bit more efficient, abbreviated form, x minus y quantity squared. In the numerator, I'm going to have this to work out. I'm making a red note here that this is minus, this is subtraction. And then I'll come back and distribute over that parentheses. Okay, so I think we're ready to kind of start putting things together now. So I'm going to multiply these 2 binomials together here. First times first, inside, outside, and last times last. And I'll go ahead and distribute this negative x. So this one, again, you notice I'm not doing anything with the denominator anymore. I'm just copying it down, holding on to it. And I'm going to distribute this 2 up here. So when you get down to the end of the problem, you're spending all your time just working on the numerator. All right, we're almost done. So now we're going to combine the like terms up here. So here's a 2x squared positive and a negative 1x squared. So that's going to give me an x squared. And I see a positive 4xy and a positive 1xy, which brings me to a positive 5xy. And then on the end, I see the positive 2y squared. Did I account for everything? I got the x squareds, I got the xy's, and I got the y squared. And sometimes it's hard to know about the order to put these things in, but you'll notice that the x's are going in descending degrees and the y's are going up. So this is an x to the second, x to the first. Technically there's an x to the 0 there. And then this is a y to the 0, and here a y to the first and a y to the second. So one is in ascending and the other is in descending degree. This one won't reduce. That would be the last thing you'd always want to check for. This one won't reduce. So I hope that watching me work from scratch there will help you with figuring out your addition and subtraction of rational expressions.